Everyone in the cafeteria noticed the wheelchair before they noticed the woman sitting in it. They noticed the chrome frame, the worn black armrests, the careful way she parked near the window so she would not block the busy path between the coffee machine and the nurse's station. They noticed what she could no longer do before they remembered what she had spent her whole life doing. But Atlas noticed something else. The German Shepherd stopped so suddenly that the leash went still in Ethan Cole's hand. His ears lifted, his body lowered into that quiet, focused posture Ethan knew from years of working beside him. Atlas was not distracted by food, noise, or the steady movement of hospital staff. He was staring at a woman sitting alone with a paper cup of coffee cooling between her hands. Ethan followed his partner's gaze. The woman was in her early 40s, with tired eyes, silver-threaded brown hair pulled back at the nape of her neck, and the kind of face that looked like it had learned to smile even when the heart behind it was exhausted. Her name tag read Claire Morgan, RN, but nobody passing her table seemed to see the letters. They saw the chair. They saw limitation. They saw tragedy wrapped in polite silence. Atlas took one slow step forward. Ethan tightened his grip gently. Easy boy. But Atlas did not pull. He did not whine. He did not disobey. He simply looked back at Ethan with the calm certainty of a dog who had already made a decision. The cafeteria grew quieter as people began to notice. Nurses paused with trays in their hands. A young veteran in a ball cap stopped halfway through opening a packet of sugar. Two orderlies glanced at each other. Everybody knew Atlas. They knew he was a retired military canine. They knew he did not approach strangers for no reason. Claire looked up when the shadow crossed her table. First she saw the dog. Then she saw the man beside him. Ethan Cole stood tall and steady, 38 years old, broad-shouldered but not imposing, with short brown hair, watchful eyes, and the quiet discipline of someone who had spent years entering rooms where fear had to be controlled before it could control anyone else. He wore jeans, a dark jacket, and the kind of boots that still looked military no matter how long he had been out. A small German Shepherd tattoo showed just above the collar of his shirt, inked near the side of his neck like a private promise. He glanced at Atlas, then at Claire. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "He doesn't usually do this. Can I sit here?" For ordinary words. That was all. But Claire Morgan would remember them for the rest of her life, because Ethan did not ask if she needed help. He did not ask what happened to her. He did not speak to her in the slow, careful voice people sometimes used when they mistook a wheelchair for a fragile mind. He simply asked to sit with her. Before this story goes any further, tell us where you are watching from today. Share your city or country in the comments, because stories about loyalty, kindness, and second chances have a way of connecting people who may never meet. And if you believe every person deserves to be seen for who they truly are, not for what life has taken from them, consider subscribing and staying with us until the end. Claire looked from Ethan to Atlas. The dog had already lowered himself beside her chair, close enough that his shoulder touched the wheel, but not so close that he crowded her. "He seems pretty sure this is where he wants to be," she said. Ethan pulled out the chair across from her. "Atlas is usually right about people." A faint smile touched Claire's face. "That's a lot of trust to put in a dog. He's earned more trust than most humans I know." The words were simple, but something about them settled in the room. Atlas rested his chin near Claire's knee, his eyes half closed, his body calm. The cafeteria slowly returned to motion, but people kept glancing over. They were trying to understand what had just happened. Claire was trying to understand it too. For almost 2 years, she had worked at the Veterans Hospital outside Norfolk, Virginia, in a body that no longer matched the life she remembered. Before the accident, she had moved through those halls like she belonged to them. She knew which veteran liked extra creamer in his coffee, which one pretended not to be afraid before surgery, which wife needed a chair pulled closer to the bed because she would not ask for it herself. She had been the nurse who stayed late, the one who listened, the one who remembered names when everyone else remembered room numbers. Then a rain-slick road, a pickup truck running a red light, and a sound she still heard in nightmares changed the shape of everything. The doctors saved her life. They repaired what they could. They explained what they could not. Physical therapy taught her how to transfer from bed to chair, how to navigate ramps, how to measure every doorway with her eyes before entering. Insurance paperwork taught her how much dignity could be buried under forms and delays. Friends visited at first, then less often. Co-workers sent flowers and casseroles, then awkward smiles. Claire fought hard to return to work. The hospital welcomed her back. Everyone said the right things. But kindness sometimes arrived wearing the wrong clothes. People rushed to open doors before she reached them. They offered to carry files she had already balanced on her lap. They stopped sharing difficult cases with her because they assumed she had enough to deal with. They lowered their voices when talking about stairs, pain, or the future. Nobody meant to make her invisible. That was the worst part. They were trying to be gentle, and each gentle gesture reminded her that they no longer saw the nurse who had once been impossible to replace. They saw a woman to be accommodated, managed, pitted from a respectful distance. So Claire learned to smile. She smiled when a doctor called her brave for showing up to work. She smiled when a visitor asked if she was a patient. She smiled when younger nurses took over tasks without asking, then congratulated themselves for being considerate. She smiled so often that sometimes, at night, her face ached from pretending. But Atlas did not smile at her. Atlas did not pity her. Atlas chose her. Ethan noticed the way Claire's hand hovered above the dog's head, unsure whether she was allowed to touch him. He likes being scratched behind the left ear, Ethan said. But only if you want to. Claire's fingers lowered slowly. Atlas leaned into the touch with a sigh so deep that half the table heard it. She laughed, and the sound surprised her. It surprised Ethan too. Not because it was loud, but because it sounded like something that had been locked away and had finally found a small crack in the door. I guess he approves, Claire said. He doesn't fake it. Must be nice. Ethan understood more than she realized. Since leaving the Navy, he had learned that people also looked at him and saw a story before they saw a man. They saw a Navy SEAL, hero, trauma, danger, discipline, strength. They did not see the nights when silence felt louder than combat. They did not see the strange emptiness of waking up without a mission. They did not see a man who could handle crisis, but sometimes could not handle a grocery store aisle full of choices and fluorescent lights. Atlas had helped him through that. The dog had been his partner, anchor, alarm system, and witness. Atlas knew when Ethan's breathing changed. He knew when a crowded room became too tight. He knew when Ethan needed to leave before pride made him stay too long. That was why Ethan trusted him. And that was why Atlas choosing Claire did not feel random. Do you work here? Ethan asked, though the name tag had already told him. Claire nodded. I do. Case coordination now. Mostly veterans transitioning from inpatient care to home support. Before that, I was on the recovery floor. You liked it there. It was not a question. Claire looked at him carefully. What makes you say that? You said before that, like you were talking about a house you used to live in. For a second, she did not answer. Then she looked down at Atlas. I did like it. I loved it, actually. I knew what I was good at there. And now, her smile faded, but she kept her voice even. Now I'm useful in a different way. That's what people keep telling me. Ethan heard the hurt behind the sentence. Atlas did too. The dog lifted his head and pressed his muzzle lightly against Claire's wrist. Claire froze. The touch was so gentle that it broke something in her more effectively than sympathy ever had. She looked away toward the window, blinking fast. Sorry, she whispered. You don't have to apologize. Ethan said, I do that a lot now. Apologize for needing a minute. Apologize for taking up space. Apologize when people help me even when I didn't ask. Ethan sat quietly. Sometimes the most respectful thing a person could do was not rush to fill another person's pain with advice. Atlas kept his head against her wrist. After a while, Claire exhaled. Why me? Ethan looked at his partner. I don't know yet. But he knows something. The next morning, Ethan came back. He told himself it was because he had a meeting with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the hospital's service animal behavioral specialist, about expanding visits for veterans with post-traumatic stress. That was true. It was also true that he could not stop thinking about Claire Morgan and the way Atlas had found her in a room full of people. Dr. Mitchell was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and practical, with the patient authority of someone who had spent decades watching animals reveal truths humans tried to hide. She had worked with therapy dogs, mobility service dogs, combat K9s, and veterans who trusted dogs faster than doctors. When Ethan told her what happened in the cafeteria, she did not laugh. She asked questions. Did Atlas show alert behavior? No. Stress response? No. Calm. Focused. Intentional. Did she appear physically distressed? Not in a medical way. Sarah nodded. Then let's observe without interfering. Claire did not know they were watching when she entered a small conference room later that morning to deliver paperwork to a social worker. Atlas was lying beside Ethan near the wall. The moment Claire came in, the dog's ears lifted. He stood, crossed the room, and sat beside her chair exactly as he had the day before. No command. No hesitation. Claire looked at Ethan. Again. Sarah stepped forward slowly. Apparently again. Should I be worried? No, Sarah said. That's not an alarm. That's attachment behavior. But with a dog like Atlas, it means something. Ethan frowned. Something from training? Not exactly. He isn't responding to a cue. He's responding to familiarity, emotional memory, or both. Dogs remember patterns of safety. They remember scent, posture, voice, touch. They remember how a person made them feel even when the person doesn't remember making an impression. Claire gave a soft, uncertain laugh. I've never met him. Sarah studied her face. Are you sure? Claire started to answer, then stopped. There had been so many dogs over the years. Therapy dogs, service dogs, working K9s brought through the hospital to help veterans who struggled to trust people. Claire had loved those visits. She had believed the animals softened the halls. She remembered dogs the way nurses remembered patients, not always by name, but by presence. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe years ago, before everything. Ethan heard the phrase again. Before everything. As if her life had been divided with a line drawn in permanent ink. That afternoon, he asked permission to review Atlas's old non-classified service and support records. It took time, phone calls, and help from Thomas Reed, a retired Navy K9 specialist who had handled dogs through several transition programs. Ethan expected training logs, health notes, deployment summaries, handler transfers. He did not expect a photograph. It was buried in a scanned folder from a hospital support program 6 years earlier. The picture showed a younger Atlas sitting in a bright hallway at the same Norfolk Veterans Hospital. Beside him knelt a nurse in blue scrubs, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder while she spoke to a veteran whose face was turned away from the camera. The nurse was Claire Morgan. Ethan stared at the image for a long time. In the photograph, Claire was not posing. She was working. Her attention was on the veteran, not the camera. Atlas was watching her. Not eagerly, not anxiously, but with trust. The same trust he showed now when he rested beside her wheelchair. Ethan printed the photo and found Claire near the garden windows at the end of the west hallway. I found something, he said. She took the paper from him. For a moment, her expression did not change. Then her lips parted slightly. The color drained from her face, not from fear, but from the shock of being handed a piece of herself she thought the world had misplaced. Oh, she whispered. I remember this day. Ethan sat on the bench beside her chair. Tell me. Claire traced the edge of the photograph with her thumb. The veteran's name was Marcus. He had been home for 3 months and barely spoke. His wife was terrified because he would sit in their garage for hours with the lights off. He didn't want medication, didn't want counseling, didn't want anyone calling him broken. She looked down the hallway as if she could still see him. The K9 team came through that afternoon. Atlas was young, but he was gentle. Marcus wouldn't talk to any of us, but he let Atlas sit next to him. So I sat on the floor too. I didn't say much. I just told him nobody was going to force him to be okay before he was ready. Did he talk? After a while. Not a lot, but enough. He said he missed knowing what his job was. He said everyone kept saying he was home, but he didn't feel home inside himself. Ethan swallowed. He knew that sentence too well. Claire's voice softened. Atlas stayed with him the whole time. When Marcus finally cried, Atlas leaned against him like he was holding him up. I remember thinking that dog understood better than all of us. Ethan looked at the photo. Maybe he remembered that you understood too. Claire's eyes filled. She had spent so long thinking the accident had erased her from people's memories. But here was proof that a dog had carried her kindness across years, across handlers, across a life she thought no longer connected to her present one. I thought I was helping him, she said. Marcus, I mean. Maybe Atlas too. I never thought. What? I never thought kindness could come back after so long. Atlas, who had been standing beside Ethan, stepped forward and placed his head in Claire's lap. Comfort veterans. The woman many people now saw only as someone who had survived an accident had been remembered by the dog for something deeper. Some staff members felt embarrassed. Others felt moved. A few did not know what to say to Claire, which was fine, because for once silence did not feel like pity. It felt like reflection. A week later, an older veteran named Daniel Harris rolled his walker to Claire's desk and cleared his throat. "You probably don't remember me," he said. Claire looked up from her computer. "Try me." He smiled. "Room 312. Knee replacement. Bad attitude. Worst jokes. My daughter had just stopped speaking to me." Claire blinked. "Mr. Harris, you kept hiding your pain pills under the pudding cups because you didn't want to admit you needed them." Daniel laughed so hard one of the nurses looked over. "That's me. How is your daughter?" His smile softened. "We talk every Sunday now. You told me pride was a lonely thing to grow old with. Made me mad enough to call her." Claire leaned back, stunned. "I said that." "You did. I was angry for 3 days. Then I realized you were right." He tapped a folded envelope against the side of his walker. "I heard about that dog remembering you. Figured maybe I should tell you some humans remember too." Inside the envelope was a thank you card, written years earlier but never mailed. Daniel had kept it in a drawer. He said he did not know why. Maybe because gratitude felt awkward. Maybe because people assumed nurses already knew they mattered. Claire read it after he left. By the second paragraph, she had to close her office door. That was the beginning. Former patients started stopping by. A widow brought a photograph of her husband smiling in his hospital bed while Claire adjusted his blanket. A young physical therapist admitted that Claire had been the reason she applied to nursing school in the first place. A veteran named Luis left a voicemail saying Claire had sat with him through a panic attack in the ER and counted his breathing until the room stopped spinning. None of those moments had felt heroic to Claire when they happened. They had felt ordinary, part of the job, part of being human. But ordinary kindness, repeated long enough, becomes a foundation other people stand on. Ethan watched the change slowly return to Claire's face. She still used the wheelchair. She still had difficult days. Pain still came without asking permission. Some doors were still too narrow, some people still too awkward, some systems still too slow. But something inside her had shifted. She was no longer measuring herself only by what she had lost. One afternoon, Ethan found her in the courtyard with Atlas beside her. The late Virginia sun caught the edges of the hospital windows and turned them gold. "You look different," he said. Claire raised an eyebrow. "That's dangerous territory." He smiled. "I mean lighter." She looked toward Atlas. "I feel embarrassed, honestly." "Why?" "Because people have been telling me for years that I mattered. I just couldn't hear it." Ethan sat on the bench. "Pain is loud." Claire nodded. "So is pride." He glanced at her. She gave him a knowing look. "Don't act like I'm the only one in this courtyard who forgot how to accept help." For the first time since they met, Ethan looked away first. Claire noticed. "What happens when the mission ends?" she asked. The question hit so close to the center of him that his answer took time. "You wake up," he said. "You make coffee. You take the dog out. You go to appointments. You tell people you're fine because explaining the truth feels like asking them to carry something they didn't sign up for. You miss being useful in a way that made sense." Claire listened without interrupting. And then Ethan continued. "If you're lucky, a dog decides you're not allowed to disappear." Atlas lifted his head at the sound of Ethan's voice. Claire smiled gently. "Maybe he has been doing that for both of us." Ethan wanted to disagree, but could not. A few days later, Thomas Reed came to the hospital with a cardboard archive box and the stiff walk of a man whose knees remembered too many training fields. His hair was white, his voice gravelly, and when Atlas saw him, the German shepherd stood perfectly still for half a second before pushing his head into the old man's hand. Thomas blinked hard. "Well, look at you," he said, "still acting like you run the place." Atlas wagged once, dignified but unmistakably pleased. Thomas had brought old notes from Atlas's early years. Not classified records, not mission files, just personal observations from handlers who had known him before Ethan. They spread the papers across a conference table while Claire, Ethan, and Dr. Mitchell looked on. "Atlas was always different," Thomas said. "Plenty of dogs are smart. Plenty are brave. Atlas had judgment. He knew who needed space and who needed company. That can't be fully trained. You can shape it, but you can't create it from nothing." He slid one page toward Ethan. The note was dated shortly after the hospital support program. Thomas had written it by hand. "Atlas does not look for weakness. He looks for the person who still needs to be reminded they matter." Ethan read the sentence twice. Claire covered her mouth. Thomas watched her. "I remember you too, Nurse Morgan. You treated the dogs like partners, not equipment. That mattered. Handlers notice. Dogs notice more." Claire's eyes glistened. I didn't think anyone remembered. People are terrible at saying thank you on time, Thomas said. Doesn't mean they forgot. From the box, he pulled another photograph. Atlas sat beside a younger man in Navy working gear, his original handler, Aaron Mitchell. Aaron's smile was tired but warm, one hand resting on Atlas's back. Claire leaned closer. Mitchell, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, standing near the window, went very still. Thomas looked up. Aaron was Sarah's older brother. The room changed. Sarah had not mentioned it before. She folded her arms tightly, not defensively, but as if holding herself together. Aaron helped develop Atlas's support work, she said. After he left active handling, he believed K9S could help veterans transition in ways people couldn't. He died 3 years ago. Heart attack. Too young. Ethan looked from Sarah to the photograph. I'm sorry. She nodded. He would have loved seeing this. Thomas turned the photograph over. On the back, in Aaron's handwriting, were the words, "A true partner does not only protect the people in front of him. He remembers the people who need to know. They still matter." Nobody spoke for a while. It was easy to call Atlas loyal, easy to call him special, but the photograph made his loyalty feel inherited, shaped by every human who had taught him that service was not only about command and obedience. It was about presence. Sarah wiped beneath one eye quickly, pretending she was adjusting her glasses. Claire saw it, but did not comment. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand over Sarah's. Sarah looked down at the gesture. Then she let it stay. That was how the support program began to change. It did not start with a press release or a grant proposal. It started with a conference room, an old photograph, a retired canine specialist, a former SEAL, a nurse in a wheelchair, and a dog who kept choosing the people everyone else almost missed. Claire suggested a weekly listening session for veterans and hospital staff. Not therapy exactly, not a lecture, just a room where people could speak honestly about transition, injury, grief, caregiving, and the strange loneliness of being treated like a symbol instead of a person. The hospital director was cautious at first. Administrators liked measurable outcomes, clean forms, and programs that could be described in one paragraph. Claire did not blame them. Hospitals ran on rules for a reason. But she also knew that some wounds did not fit neatly into checkboxes. Ethan offered to help. Sarah offered clinical oversight. Thomas offered old training material and blunt warnings about not turning Atlas into a mascot. The dog is not a miracle machine, he said. Don't make him perform healing like a trick. Give him room to be a dog. Give people room to be people. Claire wrote that sentence on the first page of the program notes. The first session drew 7 people. 2 veterans, 3 staff members, 1 spouse, and a hospital chaplain who said he was there just to listen, though everyone knew chaplains rarely only listened. Ethan sat near the door with Atlas. Claire sat at the front, nervous enough that her palms felt damp against the wheels of her chair. She had comforted countless patients. She had spoken to grieving families. She had handled emergencies with steady hands. But telling the truth about herself felt different. I used to think healing meant getting back to who you were before, she began. After my accident, I kept waiting for that version of me to return. The nurse who could run down a hallway. The woman who could work a 12-hour shift and still stop at the grocery store on the way home. The person people needed without having to think about accessibility ramps or pain medication or whether the elevator was working. The room was quiet. But I have learned something recently. Sometimes healing is not going back. Sometimes it is learning that the person you are now is still worthy of love, respect, purpose, and a place at the table. A veteran in the back lowered his head. Atlas stood, walked over, and sat beside him. The man did not touch the dog at first. He stared at the floor, jaw tight. Then his hand lowered slowly to Atlas's head. I hate being thanked for my service, he said suddenly. Everyone looked at him. He kept his eyes on Atlas. People say it, and then they feel done. Like they handed me a receipt. They don't want to know what happened after. They don't want to know I can't sleep or that my little girl thinks I'm mad at her because I leave the room when she drops a pan in the kitchen. His voice cracked. Claire felt the old instinct rise in her, the one that wanted to rush in with comfort. Instead, she remembered what Marcus had needed years ago. She let silence do its work. Ethan watched Atlas lean gently against the man's leg. The veteran breathed in, then out. I don't need fixing, he whispered. I just need someone to stop acting like I'm already fine. That became the real beginning. Attendance grew slowly. Not because anyone advertised heavily, but because one person told another person, and the story traveled through hallways in the human way that mattered most. A nurse came after losing a patient she had grown attached to. A veteran came because his wife threatened to drag him there, then returned alone the next week. A father brought his adult son, who had not spoken much since a training accident ended his military career. Some people talked. Some only sat. Atlas treated both choices with equal respect. Claire became the heart of the room. Not because she had all the answers. Because she stopped pretending she did. She told them about the days she hated her chair. She told them about the humiliation of needing help into her own shower during recovery. She told them about smiling at people who called her inspiring while wanting to scream that she did not want to inspire anyone. She wanted to reach the top shelf without turning it into a lesson. People laughed at that because it was true. They trusted her more because she did not polish pain until it looked pretty. Ethan, at first, mostly listened. He sat near the door because exits still mattered to him. He knew every sound in the room. He could tell when a cart turned into the hallway and when someone's keys hit the floor outside. But over time, he began speaking too. Not in long speeches. Ethan was not built that way. He spoke in careful pieces. He admitted he missed the clarity of orders. He admitted civilian life sometimes felt too soft and too sharp at the same time. He admitted that Atlas had saved him from becoming a man who only knew how to survive, not how to live. After one session, Claire found him outside near the courtyard bench. "You did good in there," she said. He shrugged, didn't say much. "You said enough." Atlas lay at his feet, watching both of them. Ethan looked toward the fading sky. "I spent years believing strength meant not needing anything." Claire laughed softly. "That's not strength. That's bad engineering. Even bridges need support." He smiled. "You always talk like that. Like a nurse. Like someone who can make a person feel corrected and cared for at the same time." Her smile softened. Occupational hazard. The friendship between them grew without either of them naming it too quickly. They had both been through enough to respect slow trust. Ethan learned that Claire loved bad diner coffee, old soul music, and baseball games on the radio. Claire learned that Ethan pretended not to care about hospital gossip, but somehow knew everything. That he carried dog treats in 3 different pockets, and that he still woke before dawn even on days when he had nowhere to be. Atlas approved of this arrangement by sleeping between them whenever possible. One evening, after a session where a young veteran named Ryan admitted he had not told his family how bad things had gotten, Claire stayed late to make follow-up calls. Ethan waited because Atlas refused to leave without her. Rain tapped against the windows. The hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm of rolling carts, distant monitors, and tired footsteps. Claire ended the last call and rubbed her eyes. "You don't have to wait," she said. "I know, but you're waiting." Atlas outranks me. She looked at the dog. Convenient excuse. Ethan leaned against the desk. "Ryan's going to be okay?" "I don't know. But tonight he told the truth." "That's not nothing." Ethan nodded. Claire studied him. "You worry about all of them." "So do you." "Yes, but I admit it." He gave her a look. She smiled, then grew serious. "Ethan, who checks on you after you check on everyone else?" The question landed heavily. He could have deflected. He almost did. But Atlas raised his head, as if waiting for the answer too. "Not many people," Ethan said. Claire's voice was gentle. "Maybe that's something worth changing." He looked at her, and for a moment the hospital noise seemed to fall away. "Maybe," he said. The ceremony came 3 months after the first session. The hospital wanted to recognize the support program officially, partly because administrators liked success stories, and partly because the change had become impossible to ignore. Patient satisfaction improved. Staff burnout conversations became more honest. Veterans who had refused group support were showing up, even if they claimed they were only there for the dog. Claire almost declined when asked to speak. "I don't want to be turned into a lesson," she told Ethan. They were in the garden, Atlas asleep in a patch of sun. "Then don't be a lesson," Ethan said. "Be Claire." That sounds suspiciously like advice. "It is. I'm trying something new." She laughed, then looked down at her hands. "I'm afraid they'll clap because they feel sorry for me." "They won't. You don't know that. I know what respect sounds like." On the day of the ceremony, the room was filled beyond what anyone expected. Veterans, nurses, doctors, family members, physical therapists, administrators, and volunteers stood shoulder to shoulder. Thomas Reed sat in the front row. Dr. Mitchell stood near the side wall, holding Aaron's old photograph. Ethan stood with Atlas beside the podium. Claire rolled forward to speak. For a second, she saw what she used to fear. All those eyes. All those expectations. The chair beneath her. The body that still hurt. The life that had not gone back to what it was. Then Atlas stepped close and sat beside her. Not in front of her. Beside her. Claire placed one hand lightly on his head and looked at the room. For a long time, she began, I believe people remembered me for the worst thing that happened to me. I thought they saw the accident, the chair, the changes, the things I could no longer do. And to be honest, sometimes they did. But what hurt more was that I began seeing myself that way too. The room was still. Then a dog walked across a cafeteria and sat beside me like he knew something I had forgotten. At first, I thought he was comforting me because I was sad. Later, I learned he was remembering me because years earlier, I had helped create comfort for someone else. That changed me. Not because it made my life easy. It didn't. But because it reminded me that kindness does not vanish just because the world moves on. The good we give keeps living in places we may never see. She looked toward Ethan. This program is not about fixing people. It is about seeing them. It is about remembering that a veteran is more than a uniform. A nurse is more than a job title. A disabled person is more than a diagnosis. And a service dog is more than the tasks he performs. We are all more than the hardest thing we have survived. A few people wiped their eyes. Claire continued, if you have ever felt invisible, I hope you hear this clearly. You still matter. If you have spent your life caring for others and quietly wondered who would care for you, I hope you know you are worthy of the same compassion you give. And if this story touches your heart because it reminds you of someone who once sat beside you when you needed it most, then carry that kindness forward. That is how it keeps going. When she finished, the applause did not come all at once. It began with Daniel Harris, who stood carefully with his walker. Then Ryan. Then the nurses. Then the room. Claire closed her eyes for half a second. It was not pity. Ethan had been right. It was respect. After the ceremony, people gathered around Atlas as if he were a dignitary. He tolerated the attention with patience, accepting ear scratches and compliments without becoming impressed by himself. Thomas Reed knelt slowly in front of him. You did good, old boy, he said. Atlas pressed his forehead into Thomas's chest. The old handler's face tightened. Aaron would be proud. Sarah heard him and looked away, but Claire reached for her hand again. This time Sarah took it first. The hospital approved the permanent program before the end of the month. They named it the Seen and Valued Initiative, though most people simply called it Atlas's room. It was not a memorial, because Atlas was still very much alive and deeply uninterested in administrative naming decisions. But the name stuck because everyone understood what it meant. A room where people were seen. A room where value did not depend on strength, usefulness, rank, mobility, or the ability to pretend everything was fine. As the months passed, Atlas began slowing down. At first, only Ethan noticed. The dog took a little longer to stand after lying on tile. He slept harder after sessions. His muzzle, already touched with gray, became almost silver around the edges. Sarah examined him and spoke with the careful honesty of a good doctor. He's healthy for his age, she said, but he has carried a lot. It may be time to reduce his visits. Let him choose shorter days. Ethan nodded because he had known it was coming. Still, knowing did not soften the ache. That evening, he sat with Atlas on the floor of his small house outside Norfolk. The television was off. Rain moved against the windows. Atlas rested with his head on Ethan's thigh, breathing slowly. You've been taking care of everybody, Ethan said. Maybe it's our turn now. Atlas opened one eye, then closed it again. Ethan smiled, but his throat tightened. He thought about all the years he had believed Atlas needed him most. The feeding, the training, the commands, the vet appointments, the steady hand on the leash. But the truth was larger than that. Atlas had given him a reason to leave the house when staying inside felt safer. He had given him a reason to pay attention to someone else's needs when his own mind became too loud. He had led him to Claire, to the hospital, to a purpose that did not require a uniform. You changed my life, Ethan whispered. You stubborn old shepherd. Atlas's tail thumped once. The final hospital visit was not announced as final. Ethan refused to turn it into a goodbye tour. Atlas deserved dignity, not spectacle. But somehow people knew. Maybe because hospitals develop a sixth sense for endings. Maybe because Claire told a few people quietly. Maybe because Atlas walked slower that morning, and everyone who loved him felt the tenderness of it. He entered the cafeteria where the story had begun. The same coffee machine hissed. The same tables stood near the windows. The same morning light fell across the floor. Claire was waiting at the table where she had once sat alone. This time, she was not alone. Daniel Harris sat with her, arguing about baseball. Ryan was there with his wife and little girl. Sarah stood near the counter with Thomas. Nurses came and went, some pretending they had errands, others not bothering to pretend. Atlas paused in the doorway. Ethan looked down. "Your call, partner." The German shepherd walked straight to Claire. Just like before. Only this time, nobody looked confused. Claire smiled through tears as Atlas lowered himself beside her chair. She rested her hand on his neck. "There you are," she whispered. Ethan pulled out the chair across from her. "Can I sit here?" Claire laughed softly, even as tears slipped down her face. "You better." For a while they did not talk about endings. They talked about ordinary things because ordinary things are sometimes mercy. Bad coffee. Ryan's daughter losing her first tooth. Daniel's terrible baseball predictions. Thomas insisting no dog in Navy history had ever been as stubborn as Atlas, and Sarah immediately correcting him with 3 examples. Atlas slept beside Claire's chair, surrounded by the kind of quiet he had spent his life creating for others. After lunch, Ethan and Claire took him to the courtyard. The bench where everything had changed sat beneath a maple tree whose leaves moved gently in the wind. Ethan sat on one side. Claire positioned her chair on the other. Atlas lay between them. "Do you think he knows?" Claire asked. Ethan watched Atlas breathe. "I think he knows we're here. That's what matters to him." Claire nodded. After a moment, she said, "I used to think he came to remind me that I mattered." "He did. Yes. But he also reminded me to notice who else needed the same thing. I think that's the part that saved me. Not being seen once. Learning how to keep seeing others without disappearing myself." Ethan looked at her. "That's a hard balance." "I'm still learning." "Me too." Atlas shifted, pressing one paw against Ethan's boot and his shoulder against Claire's wheel. Claire smiled. "Still bossing us around." "Always." The support program continued after Atlas's visits became rare. That was the beautiful part. What he started no longer depended on him being in the room. People had learned the habit of noticing. Nurses checked on one another after difficult shifts. Veterans invited newcomers to sit with them. Family members spoke more honestly about fear and exhaustion. Claire trained volunteers to listen without rushing to repair. Ethan helped lead sessions for service members transitioning out, telling them the truth he once needed to hear. Losing a role is not the same as losing your worth. Sometimes Atlas came for short visits, and the room brightened when he did. Sometimes he stayed home, sleeping in the sun, and people told stories about him anyway. One afternoon, Ryan brought his daughter to Atlas's room. She carried a crayon drawing of a large brown dog sitting beside a stick figure woman in a wheelchair and a tall man with boots. At the top she had written, in uneven letters, "Everybody needs somebody." Claire taped it to the wall. When Ethan saw it, he had to step into the hallway for a minute. Claire found him there. "You okay?" He nodded, then shook his head, then laughed quietly at himself. "I don't know." That's an acceptable answer. He looked through the doorway at the drawing. "I spent so many years thinking purpose had to be earned through danger, through sacrifice, through being useful in big ways." Then a dog walked across a cafeteria and proved the smallest thing can change everything. Claire came beside him. Maybe small things only look small when we don't know what they will become. Ethan smiled. "You always have one ready, don't you?" Nurse habit. Good habit. A few weeks after that evening, Claire received a letter from Marcus, the veteran from the old photograph. He had moved to North Carolina with his wife and was working part-time at a community center, helping other veterans repair bicycles for kids who could not afford them. His handwriting was uneven, but every line felt alive. He wrote that he had heard about Atlas through an old friend, and that seeing the story brought back the day he first found the courage to speak. He did not remember everything Claire had said to him, but he remembered her sitting on the floor so he would not feel looked down on. He remembered Atlas leaning against his leg. He remembered feeling, for the first time in months, that maybe he was not a problem to be solved. Claire read the letter twice before showing it to Ethan. "I sat on the floor because the chair in that room was broken," she said, laughing through tears. "I didn't think it meant anything." Ethan folded the paper carefully. "Maybe that's the point. We don't always know which moment becomes the one someone keeps. That sentence stayed with Claire for days. It changed the way she moved through the hospital. She stopped trying to separate meaningful work from ordinary work. She began to understand that dignity lived in small things. Remembering how someone took their coffee, waiting before answering a hard question, looking a person in the eye instead of at the chart in their hand, making room at a table. None of it looked dramatic from the outside. But inside a hurting person, those moments could become proof that the world had not given up on them. Ethan changed too. He started calling 2 men from his old team every Sunday evening. At first, the conversations were awkward. Men trained to survive danger were not always trained to discuss loneliness. They talked about trucks, weather, bad knees, and football before anyone dared mention anything real. But eventually one of them admitted he had been sleeping on the couch because he did not want his wife to know how often he woke up sweating. Ethan did not offer a speech. He simply listened. When the call ended, he looked at Atlas and understood that the dog had taught him another kind of courage, the courage to stay present when there was nothing to fix. Claire watched that change with quiet pride. Ethan watched hers with the same feeling. Neither of them became perfect. Healing did not turn them into people who never hurt, never doubted, never had hard mornings. It simply gave them somewhere honest to place those things. It gave them each other, the program, the people they served, and a loyal old dog who had always known that presence could be stronger than any answer. Years later, people would tell the story differently, depending on what they needed from it. Some would say it was about a Navy SEAL and his canine. Some would say it was about a nurse who rediscovered her purpose after an accident. Some would say it was about a hospital that learned to see people more fully. Children liked the part where the dog remembered kindness. Veterans liked the part where nobody tried to fix the man who finally spoke. Nurses liked the part where Claire admitted caregivers needed care too. Ethan knew all of those versions were true. But when he thought about the beginning, he remembered the smallest details. The sound of cafeteria trays. The cold coffee in Claire's hands. Atlas stopping in the doorway. The way the room held its breath. The simple question that gave dignity where pity had been expected. Can I sit here? That was the whole lesson, really. Not can I save you. Not can I explain your pain. Not can I turn your life into inspiration so other people feel better. Just can I sit here? Can I share this moment without needing you to become anything different? Can I see you without reducing you to what happened? Can I stay long enough for you to remember you are not alone? On a warm spring evening, Ethan brought Atlas to the courtyard one more time. The dog was older now, his steps slow but determined. Claire was already waiting by the bench, a light blanket folded across her lap. The hospital windows reflected the sunset. Somewhere inside, a session was ending, and faint laughter drifted through the open doors. Atlas reached the bench and lowered himself with a tired sigh. Ethan sat beside him. Claire rested her hand on the dog's back. For a long time, they watched the sky change color. I used to hate this place after my accident, Claire said quietly. Not the hospital. This version of it. The ramps, the looks, the feeling that I had become a visitor in my own life. Ethan listened. Now I think this place gave me back to myself. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But enough. Ethan nodded. Atlas has a habit of returning people to themselves. Claire looked at him. Including you. He smiled faintly. Especially me. Atlas lifted his head as if satisfied with the admission. Claire laughed. He heard that. He hears everything that can be used against me. The laughter faded into a comfortable silence. Then Claire said, "Thank you for asking to sit down that day." Ethan looked at her. "Thank you for saying yes." Atlas settled between them, the bridge he had always been. And in that quiet courtyard, the story felt complete, not because every wound had vanished, but because no one was carrying theirs alone anymore. The world often teaches people to look quickly, to label quickly, to decide what someone is worth based on what can be seen in the first few seconds. A wheelchair, a uniform, a scar, a service dog, a tired face, a quiet person sitting alone. But the truth is always deeper than the first glance. Claire was never only the woman in the wheelchair. Ethan was never only the former SEAL trying to find a new mission. Atlas was never only a retired K-9 following old training. They were proof that purpose can survive change, that loyalty can recognize kindness years later, that healing does not always arrive as a miracle. Sometimes it arrives on 4 paws, walks across a crowded room, and sits beside the person everyone else forgot to truly see. So if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone who stayed beside you during a hard season, or someone you wish you had noticed sooner, carry that feeling with care. Share in the comments which moment stayed with you most. When Atlas first chose Claire, when the old photograph revealed why he remembered her, or when Claire found the courage to help others from the very place where she once felt invisible. And if stories like this remind you that kindness, loyalty, and hope still matter, subscribe and stay close for more journeys that honor the quiet bonds between people and the animals who help us remember our own worth. Because sometimes the person who most needs to be seen is the one who has spent a lifetime seeing everyone else. And sometimes the greatest act of love begins with nothing more than choosing to sit beside them.